Welcome to the Embrace Strength podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Crocker. I am an experienced trainer and active life professional. I work with people who are struggling with nagging pain to get back to the activities they love without fear of re-injury. This podcast is here to educate and provide value to you on all things health, fitness, staying active, and personal development. Let's dive in. Alrighty, so today on the podcast, I have Morgan Powers, which she is an active life professional, and she's somebody that I mentored throughout her ALP journey. And last year, she also graduated college, and she has a background working as a CrossFit coach, and now transitioning more to working as an active life professional. So I knew I wanted to have her on the podcast to share a bit about her journey. So welcome, Morgan.
Thanks so much for having me, Ashley. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. So I want you to start off by telling a little bit about your journey to working in the fitness industry. Like, what made you want to be a fitness professional?
I think that's a great way to start off. Let's see. I was very lucky to have grown up in a family that spent a lot of time in like that health and fitness mindset. So my dad was a PE teacher, um, and he like I remember growing up and like we do like push-ups in the basement together. Like it was like that's just the thing that we did. And I think I was in sixth grade when he signed me up for like my first ever strength and conditioning program.
Well, that's
Um,
awesome.
and that and actually at first when we did that, I was like, why am I doing this? Like I'm already like I already swim like every day of the week. Like I'm running almost every day of the week. Like why another thing on my plate? um, but I started this program and like it took a couple of weeks, but like I ended up like absolutely loving it. Like I was the kid that was there every day of the week. I think they ended up letting me like graduate from like the middle school program to the high school program early because like I needed more. um but that was when it kind of clicked like, oh, like I really like my coaches. Like I want to be like them one day. Like I could
Mhm.
do this. Um, and that's kind of where that interest started. Um, I guess I sustained that all throughout middle school, and then come high school was kind of when I transitioned from strength and conditioning into CrossFit. Um, my dad had been doing CrossFit already, but it was the year they like introduced the teenage division
Mhm.
that he said, Morgan, like CrossFit is starting a teenage division. You should totally try it. The gym we were at had like a CrossFit gym in the same building as the main
Okay.
facility. Um, so I'm like, okay, why not? You can't tell a 14-year-old they can't do something.
Um,
Um, so I did it and I absolutely loved it. Um, that transitioned into a multiple year I love CrossFit
yeah.
journey. I was I was definitely that that girl. Um, I was super competitive with it. I was practicing all the gymnastic skills and the weightlifting, and I got super into it. And I wanted to go to the CrossFit Games, and that was like all throughout high school. I ended up junior and senior year. I stopped doing most sports so that I could
Wow.
really pursue CrossFit.
Mhm.
Uh, Sometimes I do regret that choice, but that's where my mindset was at the time. Um, Ended up like junior year of high school is usually when you start thinking about, all right, what's next?
Yeah.
And I knew doing something like exercise science related was where most of my interest lies. So I was like, why not study it? Ended up choosing UMass, University of Massachusetts Amherst. Um, and my dad's like, hey, while you're there, you should see if you can intern somewhere. So freshman year, I joined a CrossFit gym because that was one of my deciding factors when coming to college was, is
Right.
there a CrossFit gym there? I just asked, I said, do you have an internship? Like someone said you have an internship. Can I do that? Like, sure.
That's
And
awesome.
that is the gym that I now work at full time today. That's how I got into the fitness industry, I guess. Let's see, that was like more than 4 years ago now.
Wow. That's
That's also
awesome.
before COVID.
Yes. Yes. I didn't know that about like you being competitive with CrossFit. So I'm curious to hear like when did you stop being like super competitive with it?
It was that transition from being in high school to being in college. It was really weird. Um, that happened to be the same year that they moved the open from the winter time to the fall.
Oh yeah.
Um, that wasn't the reason that I stopped, but it was just ironic that that had happened the same year. Um, but little fun fact about me, I did marching band all throughout college. So I'm going from living at home with my parents in high school to living off on my own in college. I was in the marching band, I had full-time class load. So that transition of now I have more responsibilities
Mhm.
is where I started to be like, oh, I don't have as much time and energy for this that I once did. And I'm starting to question like, do I really want to compete that bad?
Right.
Like
It basically has
I
to be close to your full-time job to be able
yeah.
to be successful at it.
And I think that's when I started to realize like I don't really care about being the competitive CrossFit athlete anymore. But that was a hard identity to leave behind because for many years I do CrossFit. Like I want to go to
Mhm.
the CrossFit games. Like I can do handstands and muscle ups and that was hard. But I think that's when that process started. Continued as I started working as a coach.
Mhm. Yeah.
That realization where, oh, if I want to be really good at coaching and if I want to be able to give my clients my full energy and I want to be good at that, it's going to be it's going to be hard, really hard or next to impossible to have the CrossFit competitive athlete too.
Right. Yeah. I think what you mentioned about shifting away from the identity as a CrossFitter is really hard. I think that anyone who has been like hardcore CrossFit, which I went through a phase of that too, that is really hard to go from like, yes, I'm a CrossFitter, I can do all these things. I really want to try to be competitive to kind of like, I'm still working out and I love exercising, maybe a little CrossFit, but I'm not so concerned with competing. And that can be a hard shift, like you're talking about. Um, so I'm curious to know what made you want to be more than just a CrossFit group class coach?
Let's see. It's funny. It started back when I was a freshman as like that was the dream to
Mm-hmm.
be someone who could get up in front of the class and lead everybody through the workout of the day, to be that person that people trusted and like go into their class. Like that was my dream. Um, and I think it was as I started to realize that there people had problems that group class wasn't solving,
Mhm.
that I wanted to be able to be something more for them.
Yeah, that makes sense. So talk a little bit more about those problems that you saw people having that group class wasn't solving.
I think I don't know where to start. That person that comes in every day with the same like achy body part.
Yep.
And
Mm-hmm.
you and I had gotten really good at modifying the workout of the day for them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that I'm is still one of my strong suits. The unfortunate side of group classes, you can get good at working around it, but you don't have the space to do all of the things that go into actually working through it and getting to the point where you don't have to modify it anymore.
Yeah, I think that's really important that I want to highlight is that you can work around things in group class, but it's not solving why it's happening in the first place. So what that means is it's going to stick around if we aren't working through it and finding out why it's happening in the first place. And I think that's so key. And that was one of my big reasons I started to get frustrated by the group class environment, is because a lot of people, I would venture to say most people, are struggling with some type of ache or pain that they've been struggling with for years. Um, so so what else? Is there anything else specific you can think of that was bothering you, or is that like the main theme?
That's one of them. And then I think it was also there are there were people that I was interested in serving that group class wasn't going to be the A, safe, and B, most effective option for them. And
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be able to give those people a space where they would feel comfortable coming into the gym.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk a little bit more about like what type of person fits in that category of someone who's like, maybe they come in and they want to do group class, but you as a coach are like, that's not your solution. Like, what does that look like?
We I've gotten a lot of people coming in that are like, I haven't done something in years.
Yep.
Or I used to have a routine, um, but like since COVID, like I haven't done anything. Lots of people coming in like that, where like you haven't done anything at all
Yep.
in at least 3 plus years.
Yeah. So why can't they just jump into group class?
Like when you come into a group class, you have like most places you have like the workout of the day.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And part of your role as a coach is to make that workout of the day work for all of the people in your class.
Right.
Um, and if you're someone that hasn't done anything in years, you might need to start with something that's even more simple than the thing that's written on the board.
Yeah. 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 I think that's what a lot of people don't realize is that the group class is not written for somebody who hasn't exercised in years. Like if you haven't exercised in years, you really don't have a base of fitness at all or any type of foundation. And so for you to jump into a group class after not doing anything for years is actually irresponsible. Or my opinion is that it's irresponsible to let that person do that because it's not going to end well.
And then we'd also have people coming in who would be like, oh, like my doctor told me that I have, like I was diagnosed with arthritis.
Oh.
And then that becomes a conversation of, okay, first we need to figure out what can we work on to make, what can we work on so that you can continue to make progress and not be in pain.
Yeah. I think that with something like arthritis, it can be scary for people. They're like, oh my gosh, like I have arthritis. Like, am I going to be able to exercise? Like, what can I do? So if you have somebody that comes in and is like, I have arthritis, I want to exercise, what are things that you're taking into consideration based on that?
I usually start with looking at where, as at least for the movement part of it, like
Mm-hmm.
what range of motion do they have?
Yep.
Because sometimes with arthritis we don't, or a lot of times with arthritis we don't want to push that.
Right.
We often want to work within it.
Yeah. I think that,
And
oh, go ahead.
um, looking at where is this person at right now? I want to meet you where you are.
Yep. I totally agree with you. And that is something that you can't do inside of a group class with other people. And that's the beauty of that one-on-one environment where you can really like take the time to assess somebody, what they're comfortable doing, like what's within that, Goldilocks zone of
Mm-hmm.
movement where it feels just right. There's not too much irritation. Um, and that's the pro of a personal training environment over a group class. And people are able to see so much better results and feel better throughout the process. Would you agree?
I agree.
So, next, I want you to talk a little bit about what your journey through ALP was like. What are some of the things that you learned education wise and then also personal development wise?
Ooh, there's a lot there.
I know there's a
Um,
lot of question.
I so I graduated from ALP in October of
Yeah.
this year. Um, and it's crazy looking back to summer of 2022 when I had started it and looking at where I am right now as a coach and just as a person in general. Um,
Mhm.
Whoever said that being an ALP is a personal development program is so true. Um, I think start for me personally too, starting it as a going into my senior year of undergrad, um, it was interesting. Where should I start?
So let's start with like you were in, you were a senior in college studying exercise science, but also doing ALP. So I want you to first kind of compare like the college education versus what you were learning in ALP.
Oh, that's good. Um, I feel like the I was in the kinesiology program at UMass Amherst,
Mhm.
and I think that program did a really good job, like presenting you with the facts.
Mhm.
Like we learned about type 2 diabetes. We learned about like all of there's so much research out there about like why is exercise important. We went
Mhm.
through so many studies like that. And I feel like I was given so much information about why movement and nutrition and sleep and all of that was important and not, we had some, but not a ton of how do we give this to your average person?
Ooh, that's really good.
I think of you have to take like 120 credits. I forget how many like kinesiology classes that I took. I think we took like one class on like actually applying that.
Oh, wow.
And it's hard because you have people in the program that are going into all sorts of different things because
Mhm.
it's so broad. You have people that are going to physical therapy after, to occupational therapy, to medical school. You have people who maybe want to go into the fitness industry or research or something
Mhm.
completely different. So I felt like we were definitely given lots of facts, lots of how do
Right.
you read studies. Um, Not so much on delivering it to a person, which is the profession that I was going into.
Right. Exactly. So you were missing that, like, okay, what, like, client application, real world, how do I work with a person? It seems like you were kind of missing that with what you were learning at
Mhm.
school.
Exactly. And I was learning some of that because I had the opportunity I'm working part time at the gym at the same time that I'm going through undergrad.
Right.
Um, and at this point in my senior year, I'm part time, but like I am very much making my way to working as a full time professional at the gym.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and ALP was something that was already on my radar. Um, I knew that it was something that I would have wanted to do at some point. The opportunity happened to present itself sooner than I had expected.
Yeah. So what are some of your takeaways from like the ALP, like education wise?
I thought the education was really good for that coach that doesn't want to just modify anymore and who wanted to work with those groups of people that maybe needed a little bit more than a group class.
Yeah, exactly. So it was more application heavy side, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But what I quickly learned is the growth that I made as an individual. Once I started to lean a little bit more into that, that's when I feel like my success as a coach and my ability to apply those things really started to like blossom.
Ooh, that's really good. So talk a little bit more about that. Like, what do you mean with that?
I think something that I struggled with for a long time being a younger coach um, was creating these beliefs around what I could do and what I was capable of a coach because I was so young. And
Oh,
I would tell myself things like, "Oh, why should someone listen to me? I'm only I'm only 20 years old.
mm-hmm.
Well, I can't do that yet because I'm only 20."
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's something that I'm still working through. Um, but once I started to be like that my because I'm young, that doesn't put limits on what I'm capable of. And I'm in this program that there are coaches in this program who are older than me and are coming back to this right now. Like I I have the tools, but I need to go out there and apply them and trust that I'm capable.
That's awesome. I think that there's a lot to be said for thinking like, oh, I'm too young. Who's going to listen to me? So how did you start to kind of work through that? Because I know you said you're still working through it, but like, how did you start to push past that limiting belief and like do things anyway?
I well, first I had to recognize that that was something that I was doing,
Mm-hmm.
and I just started taking action.
Mm-hmm. How did you recognize that that was something you were doing? Because you probably did it like subconsciously for a long time. Like, when did you start to have the awareness of like, oh, I'm kind of using that as an excuse?
Oh man, I don't know.
Yeah, it's okay. I was just curious if there.
I have no idea. I just know that like from the very beginning when I was given the opportunity to start coaching, um, that had been that had been a belief that held me back.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know when it was the point where I started to recognize that. I don't know when that happened, but when it did, it definitely became easier to push past it.
Hmm. Yeah. So, what are some of your biggest takeaways from the ALP program and across the 13 months? Which I also know this is a loaded question, but pick a few things that you're like, man, I still think about that even to this day, now that even though I'm graduated.
I figure out where to start. I think I touched on this earlier, but that I had to take steps to change ways that I carried myself and ways that I thought about myself in order to see the change that I wanted to in my business.
Ooh, that's really good.
And
Do you mind just
that's
sharing
still a work in progress.
Yeah, yeah.
um, but when I look back on where I was August of 2022, it's very different from now.
So that's really good. Talk a little bit about like give an example. You mentioned like you had to change ways that you were carrying yourself, talking to yourself, like give an example of like the change from when you first started to like now. Like what's an example of what's different?
I think I used to be afraid to like push back when maybe someone said something that like I didn't completely agree with.
Hmm.
Or I think it was the people pleasing, which is
Ah,
still something that I'm working on doing less of. Um, but 6+ months ago, I think that would be something that I would have prided myself on. Like I'm so good at keeping everybody happy. Um,
yeah.
I can say yes to all these things. Um, and I don't know when it was, but I was like, I don't like doing this anymore.
Yeah, like I'm sick of this.
I this was a thing that I was proud of, and now I'm like, this is something that's holding me back.
Wow. I think that's a big realization to have. So why is people pleasing not a good behavior to have?
I think especially when you're hmm, I think as a coach and as a professional, when your job is to take someone from a place where they aren't happy or they want something to change and you're being the people pleaser. I think there were times where I was feeding into, I think I was holding some of my clients back
Oh,
or
really?
even potential clients back.
How? How do you think you were maybe holding them back?
I think I was trying to keep them happy um, without allowing them to realize or taking them through that process to realize that what needed to change.
Hmm. I think that's a really good point to highlight because a lot of the time as coaches, like we're helping people change their behaviors and change habits, and that's not always the easiest thing to speak to people about. Like, hey, you need to change this laundry list of things. Like, can you tell me why you're not doing this one habit I told you to do? you know? But it's important because they're hiring you as the professional to help them change. And so obviously, like they don't know everything. So we can't just people please our way through working with people just to keep them happy because that's not what they hired you for. So I think that's a really important point to make. And it's a common thread among coaches, even myself, like working through being a people pleaser and breaking through that. So I think a lot of people will resonate with that.
And then on the other hand, like I was saying yes to things in like my personal life that like I didn't want to say yes
Yeah.
to keep everybody happy,
Mm-hmm.
which is exhausting.
Yeah, it is exhausting.
um, so it wasn't just as a coach, like I was doing that in
Mm-hmm.
other facets of my life too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was proud of it for a while.
Yeah. Well, I think that this is also part of our culture a little bit, especially as women. Like we can
Mm.
do it all, blah blah blah. Like say yes to everyone. Even like this is just how it is, and so that doesn't help either because there's a like subconscious conditioning that has been happening for several years. So what was beneficial about meeting with me as your mentor throughout the process of your journey?
It was really nice to be able to go to someone when I hit those bumps in the road.
Mhm.
Like by bumps in the road, I mean like problems that I didn't know how to solve on my own. And like your job as my mentor was I could go to you to ask for help and you were able to give me your like unbiased point of view. And you did a really good job of not, you wouldn't tell me like here's what you should do. Like
Yeah.
you would always like ask questions that like guided me to the point where I could
Mm,
figure it out on my
yeah.
own.
Yeah. Um, how did that make you feel? Like me asking just a bunch of questions and not like giving you like, here's what you should do.
I feel like I felt empowered. Like I felt like I was more likely to take action because in a way I'd partially figured it out on my own, figured like the
Mhm.
solution out on my own. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's always my goal with people is to help them feel empowered to do the decision that they want to make or whatever that looks like. A lot of times coaches just need reassurance like am I on the right track with this person and like or like what are your thoughts on this and just like kind of talking through that with like an unbiased person like you said can be exactly what we need to like either like confirm what we originally thought we should do or maybe think about things in a different way. So I'm glad to hear that. um So talk a little bit about who is your ideal client to work with and why.
I got very lucky in that client, the first like one-on-one client that I was granted the opportunity to work with was my ideal client. And
Oh
that's kind of
wow.
figured
That's
out how
like
it's so rare. I think if there's such thing as fate, like this was fate. Um, because I know that that doesn't happen to most people. Um, but kind of like we talked about earlier, like someone that comes in and they're like, I'm ready for a change. It's after COVID. Like I miss being fit, but it wouldn't have been appropriate to put this person into a group class.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he this was an older person. Um, I have enjoyed working with people in like older generations. Where should I start with this?
So, like, what was he dealing with when he came into the gym?
He really hadn't done much of anything in several years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he had some knee pain, which we later found out was arthritis. He had he had done something with um, his cervical spine um, that had limited him early in our days together. But he had some limitations that he was looking to work through. Um, and he had a goal of getting his very first pull up.
Yeah, so he had some limitations coming in, and then like, how did you like? What made you realize like, wow, I really like working with this person? Because you mentioned like he's an older person, right? And like you're
Mm-hmm.
really young. I mean, you're in your early 20s, so I think that is just really interesting. So like, why do you like helping old people? Well, that sounds bad, but listeners, you know what I mean, okay?
um, I think it was I've been working with him now for like 3 years,
Which is incredible.
which is
Yeah.
awesome. And it was it was empowering and inspiring to see him go from a place of not really doing much at all to being a more capable person.
Hmm. Yeah.
Like seeing that line of progression and being part of the reason that I think, especially with older people, being part of the reason that like they're not going to end up in like an assisted living facility. Like if they fall, like you know that they're going to be able to pull themselves back up and be okay after.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you've been working with him for 3 years now. So what talk a little bit about um like how have you kept him as a client for so long?
Trust.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny, we'll talk about those early days of working together and how I think both of us were so scared. Actually, I know both of us were scared because I was scared and he shared with me that he was scared. It's like, oh my
Funny.
gosh, like I don't know how to talk to this girl. Like, I barely remember her name. Something he said to me. Um, Trust, being a listener. Um, a lot of people, if you're next in line to their family, their coworkers, and then there's you, their
Yeah.
coach. Um, and especially with older people, I take that role very seriously
Mm-hmm.
because, like, he doesn't work anymore. Like, he sees his wife and he sees me.
Yeah. You're like a big person in his life. Mm-hmm.
And the trust that we built is something that I take seriously and I think is really it's precious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's
Um,
really
um, And it's interesting with him, like he's the first one-on-one client that I've ever had.
Mhm.
So building that trust was really important.
Yeah, definitely. What are some changes that you've seen in yourself as a coach, um, compared to like when you started ALP to now?
This is something that I'm still working on, but it's something that is way better than it was, is asking people questions.
Like asking better questions.
hmm I think, and I definitely still fall into this trap, but I did it more early on, is just giving people advice. And
Ah,
you give the advice. A lot of the times it's not, it's unsolicited, um, before you even, before you even know, just figuring out if someone wanted that advice.
yeah. I feel like that is such an important thing to highlight, because I think that's the case with a lot of typical trainers, is that like they just start spewing out advice at people with not even follow up questions, like minimal follow up questions. And one of the big things that you learn in the ALP program is like how to ask better clarifying questions before even telling someone what they should do, because it's like, do they want to do that? Is that their goal? Like, why do they want to do XYZ? And I think that's so important. And it goes along with like that builds trust with people, with the right people, I guess I should say. um and so I think that's really powerful. All right, the last thing I want to touch on is, what would you say to the person or the coach who's like contemplating a big investment in their career but afraid of the financial commitment? And the reason I ask you this is because, like, when you started ALP, your gym was also doing it, but then halfway through the program, they weren't doing it anymore. So you had to make a decision of like, okay, am I going to finish this or am I not going to finish this? And that required a lot of money, which is scary for people, especially when you're young, you're still in college. And so just talk a little bit more about that and like how, like, was it worth it?
Oh yeah. Um, I think something that really helped with me, and maybe it's because I was still very close to college, but most worthwhile continued education that you do, whether that's going back to school, whether that's like pursuing another degree, you you have to invest money, time, energy into that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that kind of viewing that like, oh, I had a lot of friends who were like going to grad school or going
Right.
to some PT school, all of that, and like they're investing time, money, and energy into that thing. And that's kind of how I viewed ALP.
Mm-hmm.
Like if like I knew it was going to be worth it because I was investing in myself
Mm-hmm.
so that I could do better after it.
Yeah. Why is it important to invest in yourself?
If you're not happy with where you are, like you have to invest in yourself. If you're not okay with if you're not okay with staying where you are.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think what you're saying is like, if you're not okay with staying where you are, you have to invest in yourself to get a different result. And I think that's really huge for people. It's huge for coaches, because I think a lot of trainers can stay stuck in a situation that they're unhappy in because they're not willing to invest the money necessary to develop better skills or to get better. And they just stay stuck. And all that does is like prolong your situation that you're not happy in. So, like, yeah, it's going to be uncomfortable to invest in yourself and put that money down, but the result you're going to get is different than where you are. So, like, you have to make changes to see changes, which sounds silly, but and we tell it to clients all the time, but I see that with a lot of coaches. It's hard to see it that way.
Hmm. I think it's scary in investing in yourself, but I think it was scarier to think about like what happens if I don't do this.
Ooh,
Like
yeah.
especially when it transitioned to now I'm investing in this financially, like that was the point where I was graduating from college. I had a client who I if I didn't get to the end of the curriculum, I wouldn't have been someone that they should be working with anymore.
Yeah.
And like I think like not continuing on with it was scarier than investing in it.
Yeah. I think that's I think that's really powerful too. And I think that that is something that a lot of coaches either choose to not think about or don't think about. All they can think about is like the price tag. But it's like, what's going to happen if you don't? And I'm really similar to you as I view like investments in myself as like, what happens if I don't do this thing? And it's usually like, I'm not going to be, I'm not going to move forward or something, you know, depending on what it is. It's usually like, I'm going to stay stuck. Like, um, and so I think that's really good. So Morgan, tell the people where they can find you on Instagram if they want to check you out and resonate with who you work with. Where can they find you?
I am Coach M Powers
Okay.
on Instagram.
Awesome. Cool. And I'll put that in the show notes for people as well. But thank you so much for coming on. I think people are going to enjoy this conversation.
Thank you so much, Ashley.